Okay, so we've had videos on. We've looked at the Treaty of Versailles. We've looked at the structure of the League of Nations. We're now going to look at Manchuria, and then the next video we'll look at Abyssinia. Okay, so the Manchurian Crisis. Bit of a background first of all that we need to go through. Um, First of all, the start of the 1920s, there was a huge boom in the world economy, and a lot of this centers on America. America became just huge power following World War One. You'd had a mass production, etc., which I'll cover in later videos. You'd lots of new products to buy. America had benefited the most from the war. Yada yada yada. 1929, that will all change. The Wall Street crash happens. The stock market crash happens. Millions of Americans lose their jobs. The banks go bankrupt. Confidence in spending is gone. It disappears. It's sapped. And the knock-on effect of this is huge. World trade is badly hit. I've used the phrase a few times in my class. America coughs or sneezes, the rest of the world gets cold. So what you start to see is countries start to put tariffs, trade barriers on to protect their own industry, to encourage people to buy from within their own country. And America did this to Japan, right? And this is basically a huge blow for Japan, because it's going to result in a lot of less trade for Japan. It's going to result in Japan no longer can import food as well. And the Japanese production and employment fell by almost a third, 30%, from 1929 to 1931. So Japan's left in a bad place. So America's in depression, but then this affects Japan and puts Japan there as well. And when a country falls on hard times, people start to look elsewhere for their answers. What are we going to do? So the Japanese army are going to have a say within their country of what should happen. And they find ears within Japan willing to listen to them. And there's a lot of background to this. So people in Japan weren't happy with how Japan had been treated, for example, in the peace settlement. They weren't huge victors here. They weren't seen as a major power alongside Britain, France and the USA. And the view in Japan is that the West are pushing them around, right? So an example would be that the Washington Naval Agreement was signed in 1922. And for every 5 battleships that were built by Britain and America, Japan was only allowed to have 3. So they were seen very much as a secondary power by their people. Also, because of what had happened in the crash, in America, the Japanese government, as is usually the case with governments, gets the blame when a depression happens. So the Japanese army is saying, well, the only way we can solve these problems, the only way we can show power is to take territory, to land grab. And that's going to come with Manchuria. Now, Japan actually had some influence in Manchuria, right? It was a province of China. Manchuria was valuable. It had raw materials, so you had iron ore there. You had coal there, which were valuable materials that Japan didn't have. China was also in chaos at this time. The country was weak, right? The last emperor they'd had, who was 6 years old, Puyi, was overthrown in the revolution which took place in 1911. China had then pretty much collapsed and been divided up by warlords. So Japan had been allowed to have an army here to protect their territory that they'd taken from Russia in 1905. And on top of this, they've got an army there to protect their South Manchurian Railway, right? So basically, with China in turmoil, with the Chinese government in chaos and not able to resist really anything that's going to happen, the time was right for Japan to do something. And that's something happens in September 1931, when you've got an explosion takes place on the South Manchurian railway lines just outside of Mukden City, right? And Japan says this is Chinese sabotage. The Chinese are unhappy. They're trying to get rid of the Japanese. That's what Japan claims. China and your army have done it. Now, the Chinese army were based nearby the South Manchurian Railway at this point. But China said, our army never left the barracks. They didn't leave, right? So you've now got Japan saying, well, you did, and we basically it gave Japan the excuse they needed to take over the area. And this was done within months, and weak China had to withdraw at this point. China was very weak. So what you see is, in February of 1932, Japan sets up a puppet government. In other words, a one they would control in Manchuria. and they invite the last Chinese emperor, Puyi, back and put him in charge. He'll have some power, but not really, because he's going to be controlled by Japan. Okay? Now, you're China, you're struggling, you need help. Where do you go? You go to the League of Nations. Japan will turn round, and Japan's like a council member, and they say, well, we took control because the land is out of hand, the area was out of hand. China didn't deny that Japan had a right to be here, but the League has a huge problem, and the problem is that Japan does have an argument, right, that the area was in chaos. This incident apparently has happened, right, if you believe that, and the leading member in the League of Nations Council, one of the top 5, is the Japanese. They're on the council. They are a key power. You don't have America there. You don't have Germany there. You don't have Russia there. So Japan is even more important. But on the other hand, Japan's used military aggression, which is everything that the League of Nations is said to stand against. They've basically bullied China, right? And the League turns around and says to Japan, get your troops out of Manchuria. You know, persuasion doesn't work. Japan takes some more land, takes some more territory. So what we've got is the League of Nations sets up an investigation, an inquiry, and this is going to be led by Lord Lytton. And basically, Lytton's going to be sent to the area to produce a report and gather information. Now, at this point in time, you couldn't just hop on an aeroplane from London Heathrow and fly like direct and get there that day. Or that's not going to happen. But he still had the option of going by plane, making, you know, a few stops and getting there quick. He was basically a doddering old man who used it as a bit of a holiday, so he went by boat, and he had a pretty good time along the way, seeing the world. And the report was not published until a year later, September 1932. This is a year after the incident. This is like for any year 11 sitting here now doing GCSE revision. Oh, you're getting a detention. What for? Oh, something you did in April of year 10. It's a year ago, right? It's pointless now. The damage is done. So it was a thorough report. It was in favour of China, but Japan, they're in the wrong. They've been proved to be in the wrong. They're told that Manchuria has to go back, and every country in the League will back this, bar Japan. So what does Japan do? Well, it's quite simple. They humiliate the League of Nations, and in March 1933, they walk out. A key power just leaves the League, and Japan's now openly wanting more land, more territory. So they went to take over the Jehol province, which is south of Manchuria. In 1937, they decide they're going to take in China anyway and go start invading China. Well, what can the League do? Right? Oh, well, we can stop trade with you. Well, that could happen, but Japan's main trading partner was America. They weren't in the League, and they were in depression as well. They weren't going to stop trade, so it won't work. That's useless. Britain could have got involved more, but we don't want to, right? Because we don't want to actually harm our trade in Asia, British Empire. We don't want that to happen. People try to make excuses, but the precedent is set. If you're a dictator who wants to invade another part of the world, take over land, etc., go into a neighbouring area, do whatever, the League of Nations are not going to do anything about it, because quite simply they can't. Okay, so let's see how this affects Abyssinia in the next video. Thanks for watching.